Audio test. had to work today. So, welcome to the Site Committee. First agenda is facilities update from John Shell and Brian Templeton. Who's going to go first? Okay, Darren.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
That's fine.
Is that we talked about this? Is it okay? Is that bother you if I just sit here?
Yeah.
All right. Do you mind if I give you a mic? No. I thought you were really sorry.
Close that door back there.
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. Thank you.
That's what y'all want to do. That's fine.
Thanks.
Testing.
Good. I guess you want to start it, right? Yeah. Why it's done that? It's interesting. It's about March the 29th, 2021. I think was when we first met. And so here we are a year later. And I guess you've wondered what's been happening. So I guess this is kind of a three-part presentation. And we're going to try to, I guess I'd like to do just a quick review, just to remind you of what we kind of thought we understood at that time. And then currently what we've been doing, and maybe state then again, what we think we still need to close this study out. So go ahead to the next slide. That's going to be too hard to read there. Can you get that full screen on the PowerPoint? Okay, now go to the next one. We'll eventually have all this stuff in a written form you can have. But basically, that's all that's saying. We started out in each of those months, we started doing things like, and I'll show you some examples of that, to start reviewing demographics primarily. Michael Cars and I talked a lot about what kind of numbers it looked like, enrollment and so forth. And we started meeting with people after we did that, some student projections. We started meeting with folks and interviewed with principals there in 1-3 in April. And then we did have a break, probably a little bit. Hal and Brian and Dr. Elliott and Dr. Dye were kind of gracious as I went through a little bit of a physical disability for a while. And we had to do some Zoom meetings, that kind of stuff. And then we had a summer break. And then we came back and started having some other review meetings and started doing what I call educational specifications. And I'm going to show you some slides about that. And then, of course, the Christmas break comes along, that slows us down. And then in January, we kind of started cranked up again, started looking at really how do we start dealing with some of the issues we've not dealt with yet. So if you'll flip to the next slide. Hang on. I'm just going to flip through these. You don't have to look at that too much, but flip on the next one and the next one. But those are three different scenarios. Remember that we did estimates about the whole district. We did student estimates about the individual school. And so we had 2 or 3 different estimates that go on. I say estimates, projections. And this was kind of the thing that drew my attention. The red marks we identified, it seemed like a lot of grade levels had more than 500 students there. It was growing at different times, and we said maybe that's the point we need to think about what the enrollment might be. Because it's one thing, I always say it's better to have, it's more, how should I say, accurate to have projections for the whole district. But we tried to do both look at the district and also look at what happens at individual schools. Let's go to the next one. If you remember, then we had some group meetings and tried to decide what are the options we have of the educational organization for this community, and certainly for school districts specifically. And we looked at a lot of different options from K5s, K4s. You'll see at the top, somebody suggests we'll have a 6th grade. Could we have a 7th or 8th grade? When we finished out, go ahead, and we kind of tested that. And we came back and said at that meeting, we think you ought to seriously consider the 5th, 6th, and as a component of the educational model. So you'd have a K4, a 5, 6, and then a 7, 8, and 9, 12. One of the reasons was because the middle school, we met with them, and they have a lot of issues about the space they have now and what's going to happen if they go from 1,300 or something on to 1,500 to 1,800 in the future. So again, that's a little bit hard to read from there, but we kind of plotted that out, looked at those 3 different, and that kind of charted out that direction. So you can flip on to the next one. So all those are really telling us is that we think the planning model should be about 600 students per grade level. And that's how we set up our planning model for the future. Go to the next one, please. And we did the same thing, trying to look at what happens at the 7th and 8th, and in the high school. The high school is the same thing, about 1,300. Well, it's 1,388, I think, right now. But if we wind up with 600 per grade level in the future, that means the high school is going to be close to 2,400. So what does that mean in terms of education programs? So let's go to the next. That's just another variation of that to throw in the 5th and 6th, and then the 7th and 8th. If we did those two models, you could see what that would happen. Go to the next one. And so here I'll show you some planning things. First of the year, Michael Carr sent us an update before some of the estimates actually included the COVID-19. We eliminated those and we put them in. And so this is really what the 21-22 enrollment was. So we went through that scenario again and said, okay, what does that mean? So you see we've got the number of kindergartens. You can see there's 401, and then about 5539, if I'm reading that right, over there for the total. So that's where we were in January. And so now the question is those estimates still closed? Let's go to the next one. So I plotted back this from what we showed you last time, and I purposely did that so you could see. Now look at the numbers: 400, 393 for first grade, 429. I started looking at that and I said, wait a minute, what's happening? There has been some decrease, at the numbers right now. But if you look at the blue numbers, you can see in the 401, the 2025, we're back to 500 something. In all three of those, there you get to about 596 by the time we get to 2035. So some are going up and some are down, but this causes us to pause and say, let's rethink, let's make sure our projections are okay, what projections we use. And let's move on to the next one. And so I'm not going to bore you with this, with all those, but I hope you can see that well enough. Then we started looking at every elementary school and then identifying classrooms and support areas. We talked to the principals. It's surprising to us. If you look at there, you can see down below where it says support areas. Some schools have more support classrooms than they do regular classrooms. And so we charted that on every school. We actually got with the principals, do diagrams on their floor plan, and then we located where those different support areas are. And so if Arnold was a K5 or if it's a K4, that's what we think that would look like. And then over on that, the BDP, you can see the BDP enrollments there. But as we took the existing enrollment that's there now and plotted out how many regular classrooms, make sure we got some background information. And then we come to this, and then you can see the red numbers are now the summation of all those. That's how many classrooms we're going to need to solve the BDP. And so really it comes up, that's the capacity of Arnold School. And that each of those red numbers, the BEP, the first red number is BEP capacity. That means if you follow BEP requirements per classroom, that's what the capacity. And also, I think you all remember when Hal did it, we did the same thing. Probably you need to look at program capacity because probably it's going to happen, very seldom ever happens when it's an exact number in every classroom. I know you can do some averages there. So that shows you what the actual capacity is for each of those schools. So as we move forward, then the big question is, how long can we keep going the way we are before we implement the plan, the educational plan of K4 and then 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12. The big key in that is, or two things, how long can you remain in K5? The other thing is, how long can you maintain the middle school? If it's 1388, how long is it going to be? So they're running over. They've already talked about having to have a new cafeteria or expanding cafeteria because of the number of students. And so what happens there dictates a little bit about, I think. So maybe that's a good time to pause a minute and to say here. The idea of what we'd like to get to is to be able to plot out. You told us now that you're probably not going to be able to get funding for anything for a few years. But what I'd like for us to do is tell you there is going to be a milestone out there in the future, whether it's 5, 8, or 10 years. there's going to have to have something done. Either the plan for the 5-6, or if we do something else, and then we've got some issues on the high school too. So Brian can tell you this too. Look at whatever date you want to look at and we give you. Just remember, you've got at least a year to design and probably 2 years for construction. You've got a 3-year window. So if you need it, if you're looking at this and we have the charts that if we don't get this done by 2030, we're going to have a major problem at the middle school. And that's what we want to see. What's it going to look like at the middle school in 2030? What's it look like at the high school at that same time? And what's it look like at the every K-5? And that's kind of the information we want to try to give you to make a good decision. Because we'll think a period of time there's going to be a milestone. I think it's going to be key on the middle school. But you just got to make sure, in a sense, that probably if we could do the 5-6 by a certain date, that means now all of the K-5s become K-4s, which enrollment's not going to be an issue. Does that make sense? Yes. And least of all those K-5s, if you look at them, and we'll give you this in written format, you can be able to see the support areas and what you're going to do, the ESL, the ERC, and the RTI, and you just got all kinds of spaces that if things were different, you could put a lot of more students in there if you didn't have to have those classrooms used by something else. There is a caveat, again, if you read those in the future. When I say support areas, not every support area is the size of a regular classroom. I didn't try to distinguish it right now. There are several in there that are used for other things, from assistant principal's office to some kind of a library or a computer lab or something to support these, or ESL. You got a lot of ESL classrooms. They would be adequate, but you got other areas like speech and hearing that might be stuck off in the room to 300 square feet. Does that make sense? Okay. So then back to the district, over on the yellow area, then you can see that when you're looking at that, well, you've got a number there. I have to get my glasses on so I can see from here. But if you've got a K, you've got a K5, and that number for the total is 2880. So if you've got, and then for the as for the BP, the plan capacity is 2592. So those numbers there at the bottom then really tell you that the 2486 and you can look at the 24, 33, 25, 38. So it looks like it's not too bad for all those years as a K5, but then you have to look at each individual school and see what happens there, because some of them are really tight, especially Arnold. Sorry for that static I'm moving around. And we know that 5 hours are pretty maxed out. Brian and I've talked about Candy's Creek. You probably could do 6 classroom addition there if there was a problem with enrollment. But that's one of the few schools that you could do. You know, George Stewart has a lot of space, but again, it's a lot older school, and the question is how many more classrooms do you want to add on that school? Right now, that enrollment seems to be decreasing from some of the projections. But that's what we keep trying to remind ourselves, and we'll remind this body too, is we're doing our best to try to kind of set the baseline of what some of the issues are, and recognize we're doing our best to try to identify what the enrollments are based on, or projections based on current enrollment as we know today. But we're not yet brought in the issue that we know is happening in the city. We've been told several times what happens when a developer comes in and develops a 100-unit place in the community. That's going to impact some schools. And so we've got to be prepared for increased numbers, where I think that's why it's still better to look at the 600 planning model. I still think that could be a good number, because you can kind of plan accordingly. And then wherever that happens, you might have to redistrict or something else. But you could probably address that better. Let's go to the next one. So again, I just want you to know we did the K5s and K4s over the next one. And the same thing for the middle school 7th and 8th, and the middle school intermediate school 5, 6. Did the same thing, trying to match it up. So if you looked at those charts, I think they would support some of the decisions we're making about what we want the future to look like as far as the organizational plan. There is the second down is the middle school. If you can see that's got two red areas. Right now, Don, you probably noticed it too. When we designed the middle school, we always said in Cleveland City Schools, we'd like to keep 25 students per classroom, not 30. But you could do 30 in that middle school 7 and 8. Obviously, you could actually go up to 30 per classroom, and you could get the number up to 1,400. So pretty easy for that. But again, we put that there just to kind of remind you. But you can see the next one down has the enrollment of 6 through 8 based on the 25. Let's go to the next one. You can pause me if I don't make any sense. I just did this right at the last to kind of show you the intermediate school. That's the middle school, but somebody might ask, and we'll make this more graphically clear when we file a report. But each of those pods have 20 classrooms in them. Right now, you can only use 16 of them. So you basically have 48 classrooms that you can figure capacity on. But if this is a 7th and 8th, then you no longer have wings. You just got a school that's got 48 classrooms in it. So you got 1,200 without ever thinking about the 30. But that's assuming inside that, I've shown you where we've got science, and I'm not doing something right. It's just too close. But you've got 4 science rooms and the other classrooms around that. I just like you to see that based on it. I don't know if you can read that at the bottom or not. That's where it came up with the 48 classrooms. But that means in each of those wings, there's 4 support areas that are for resource or CDs or something. Plus around the media center, and for whatever, got all kinds of large computer labs, other kind of things. A lot of sport area here. Plus art, 2 art rooms, computer science, and of course all the special PE and little theater and band and so forth. So I just wanted you to see that when you go to the 7th and 8th, there's going to be plenty of room in that school to deal with future enrollments as a 7th and 8th. Okay. But if you use it as a middle school right now, it's going to be hard to get up to 14 or 1,500 before there's a major issue in student capacity. Let's go. Just so you know we've done it, you'll see this closer. What this represents is after Brian and I met with folks, all the teachers, and we started talking about 5th and 6th, and everybody's very positive about that. What's it look like? We talked about the sports teams. We kind of got that resolved, we think. We've identified the 6th grade teams that could play in the middle school. But everybody's realized that we wouldn't have to have the same sports complex at the intermediate school as you have in the middle school, and we can make those teams available. But the big thing is just the enrollment and the number of classrooms. Rather than science rooms, they asked us to call them STEM labs. So every group of teachers and 3 classrooms would have a STEM lab instead of a science lab. So I just plug that into a space survey and you're going down to the next one. And the yellow part, the green part, and that last area, that's the part you want to know. When I did kind of I told Brian, I'll call it a straw man or a placeholder. It's looking at administration and kind of thinking about the middle school. It'd be less scope of all those different support areas, but you still have a library, you have administration, you have guidance, you have PE. If you've got a gym, you got 1,200 students, you're probably going to put 1,200 seats in the gym so the whole student body can meet, right? That's some assumptions I made. But when I came out with that, then we look at what I call efficiency. You got net area, and you got walls and those kind of things. You get a gross area. It's about 170,000 square feet. I've got 3 different worksheets I did, because usually what you always have to go back and say, well, I could reduce this space, I could reduce this space, and might get it down to 160. So I'm going to say to you right now, which we don't have to have the details on that, but what's important about that, think about if you're going to get funding, and that's the first project you have, you're going to have to buy land, and you're going to have a construction cost that matches the 177,000 square feet. Should I go on land? We've been doing this right now in a couple of other places. We're budgeting about $400. square foot.
Good gosh.
The bids right now are incredible, you know, and we've tried to do something. We're doing a CT, and Brian's kind of on the same thing too. But I say 400 because that's some contingency in there, because you'd hope you could do it for 300 or 350. But really, I just think right now, contractor is saying in today's cost, it's probably 350 to 400 dollars a square foot. We're having smaller projects coming in at 500 to 600 dollars. So it's a strange time we're in, but obviously I want you to just have a perspective. If you build a new school of 170,000 square feet, it's not going to be 20,000 or $20 million like it used to be. It's going to be much more dollars, and that's something we have to deal with. Who knows? That will be anything you'll have to wrestle with probably another 5 to 6 years, or maybe even 8 years. But that's something that's coming down the pipe. Yeah. Let's go to the next one.
Don, the current middle school is like 219.
I think it's 219 if I remember right.
219.
But I'm not positive.
I was saying, I looked it up long enough. I've been, looking up things lately, and it was 243,000 square feet.
Well, it could have been. I just don't know.
Is what it is, but that's for 3 grades. So you're
Right.
saying it's 600 students per grade, so we would plan a 5th and 6th grade. That's what we decided to do for 1,200
Exactly.
students.
Exactly. That's what the planning model said. That's the numbers in there. And then you have to really, at some point, kind of decide, does the enrollment say 1,200? Because that's the BEP capacity, but the actual program capacity
Right.
might be 1,000, 1,100. So in essence, if we think the enrollment's going to actually go to 1,200, we might need to build a 1,400 capacity. The way I would deal with that, I think, and Brian would say the same thing, you probably build the core area large enough to handle the bigger, make sure you can handle the school size you want. And all the classrooms you wouldn't build, you might add on 3 or 4 classrooms in the future, or maybe even a team. There's a couple of teams, which could be 8 classrooms, so you could reduce the classroom numbers, because you don't want anybody, you don't want to go out there in the classroom for sitting empty. But you got to build a building so it could be expandable, and you could do that.
That's what we did at Katie's Creek.
Right,
So
which
that
makes
big
sense.
core
That's why you can
area.
now add 8 classrooms, right, Brian?
6.
I mean, 6, you got 3 wings. Okay.
I've got a question. Is this a better way to go than building a new another elementary school and then rezoning? Because you've got transportation problems. You could have a family that have 4 different locations.
Right.
I wonder how parents feel about this.
I think eventually you're probably going to have a elementary school also, either a K4 or a K5. But it's good you're asking those kind of questions, because we've as our group, we've tried to answer those when, and even some of the staff we've met with. But you still, a new K5 or a new K4 doesn't solve the middle school.
Right.
And so every scenario we've gone through, that's the same issue. It gets back of what's going to happen with the middle school. Do you want to, when somebody said, well, can you add on to the middle school? Well, do you want an 1,800 student middle school? On that site, you're going to build on expansion, and there's not a good way to do that, in all honesty. And it probably costs you so much to try to add on. But the way those are laid out too, I can't try to come up with a little schedule one day. I didn't quite like it, but there's a lot of fire marshal issues, you know, with exits and daylighting and all that kind of stuff. It's really hard to, you can add a few classrooms, but not to match. So that's kind of what we've determined so far. But we want you to keep asking those, because I think somebody will ask you someday.
Do we have room to add on at the middle school?
No, that's what I'm saying. I don't think there's a good way to add on. I mean, it's not like it's a double or quarter you can just go in and add on. It's kind of in between.
And the other expense you're going to have is that you're going to have another principal, another assistant principal, more special ed teachers, because you've got another grade levels that you've got to address.
Yeah.
So all in all, it's very expensive.
Yeah. Well, I think that this is probably out of my league, but I know they talked about that, because again, you'd hope if you've got 6th grade and 5th grade somewhere, those same teachers could come. You have some same supervisors. So, you know, you're going to add another building of operational cost, but hopefully, do y'all remember what happened at 5 Bauer? I don't know if I even bring this up, but when we did 5 Bauer, when we had to close the school,
Oh, yeah.
remember that? And the reason everybody got upset is because they thought they're going to lose their job. So you're going gonna stay, you're gonna need the same number of people. And if you increase, you're gonna have to increase teachers. So hopefully that'd be an answer that you all could help us formulate that would be a good answer for somebody else.
And it is a good question. I think operational is something we have to look at, what exactly it would look like. We've got a number of years when you plan that out, but you would definitely need it. You would have that principal
Right.
and at least something, you know.
More SROs, everything.
So that's part of it, but it wouldn't be as much as opening a brand new elementary school. We're starting from necessarily scratch in some sort. So, you know,
Is
fifth grade
anyone else
teachers
doing
come
this
over.
anywhere in
Yes.
the country?
I think Maryville does.
Maryville, that's 4 or 5 years ago, Don, is when my colleague came to me and told me about the idea. Because the only athletic facility you got, you're gonna have to have for PE, the gym. There's no softball field, soccer, baseball, because they use Maryville Middle School. And they call it, that's where I got the idea from. And my colleague told me they played at Maryville Intermediate, I think is what they call it. Have you been there, Don?
We designed the primary and intermediate.
Either one. Either one, and not, excuse me, when I started meeting, I forgot to ask, are you feeling good now too? Because
I think when we were really surprised, or that it seemed like when we first started, there was a lot of negatives.
Yes.
And Brian picked up on that, said, I don't know if I like this or not. But then as we talked about it, and we had other meetings and looked at the options and so forth, once we crossed the issues of sports and playing on the middle school team,
Right.
Once we bridged that, didn't seem to be a big issue anymore.
But you're doing good on your health, though. I should have asked you that. Are you feeling better now?
Yeah, I'm sorry about my eye today. Last night I went up with a sty and had to go to the doctor yesterday to try to get that fixed. But I'm doing better on my walking.
Okay, good.
Thanks for asking. Yeah, but I'm still in physical therapy. I thought I'd be playing golf 3 months ago, but I'm still not there yet. They tell me I still got some back issues. They suppose I could take shots and take care of it, but I've done that 3 times and it's not working. So they're going to do some MRIs again. And the old surgeon said, I hope there's not anything hiding back there, but we're going to make sure before we send you to do the.
Glad you're doing better.
But thank you for asking. Yeah.
And I was thinking it'd be nice if we had that lot on the other side, beside Candy Creek,
Yeah,
where that would make transportation.
we thought that, I think there's some wetlands in there, but that's the other thing, just y'all keep that in your mind. The cost we talked about is for construction. Anytime you do another project, you're gonna have, besides the operation, besides that, you're gonna have land costs, architectural fees, other kinds of administrative costs, are probably another 15 to 18.
How many acres do we have in Cleveland Middle School?
33, I believe.
So if you take the outdoor athletic fields away.
That counts everything, parking, athletic fields, and we've got some non-usable area.
Are we talking 20 to 25?
Brian and I were talking a few minutes ago, we think 25 to 30. But you have to think about what kind of land you've got.
Yeah.
I mean, if it has to be, there's swampland on part of it, and you have a lot of drainage issues, and there's no utilities, and it's not very level, but, you know, you've got more site costs, but you want enough that you can have I was trying to remember what the state of Tennessee used to have a thing, it's like so many for a middle school or an elementary school, they didn't say intermediate. And then you have 1 acre for every, say it's 10, 1 acre for every other. So you see right there, you'd be 22 plus some area for parking and maybe a play field or something like that.
That was something that was brought up as far as having students in multiple schools location for the site would be key for this to work well.
I don't know if there's that much land available in the city.
Yeah.
No, we talked about Stewart School being a 5th, 6th grade school. That's right, smack in the middle of town, perfect as far as location. And I think Nate, you brought that up, didn't you? You threw that up there. About taking an existing school and making it that 5th and 6th grade and doing what we have to do to make that happen, and then adding on an elementary school.
Do you know what kind of acreage is it goes to?
And it's in swamp too.
Yeah, that's the thing about, I think you were telling me one time, a lot of it's not buildable.
Army Corps of Engineers holds that control.
Can that be creek style?
We would have to check with John and Joe, like I said, that's actually, he would be on TDEC.
I don't
It does.
And
Playground
it's
area.
just-
I was out there kayaking.
So have you projected a timeline of when we should anticipate this? But, what's the timeline that we're looking at?
Well, that's what we hope to define better as the final report. We'd like to have a little more information. We've not talked about the high school yet, some issues there. So you've got several things that we're trying to lay out for you. And like I said, I think if you look at the enrollments, we've hit the 25, 30, 35, and there's numbers in between there, of course. But based on the fact that we know it's going to be a few years before you get probably have any funding available at all. And then you've got a period of time, probably right now in my mind, it's somewhere in the 30 to 35. You're probably going to have something in place.
Are you saying year 2030?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah. But again, we'll try to pin that down a little bit more. Hopefully we can, as best we can about it really relates to the information we got here. We look at every school and say, can that school, if it's a K-5, how long can it accommodate the students based on the enrollment today, enrollment future, and keep the BDP? That's what those other things were. And then we look back at this, one of these documents, and say, okay, we got different projections for each of those years based on the district. How close could they be, or what could happen if we have increases? Then there could be some administrative decisions then about what can we use some of the support area for classrooms. I think we've eliminated adding on to most all the others. That's why I said I think if you went too far before long, you'd be saying, what are we going to do about another elementary school? And that's when we came back and said, why don't we build 5, 6 first? And that solves that problem, because it may be 6 to 8 years before we can actually have the 6, 8 in place.
Are you saying that the 2030, 2035 time projection timeline would be when we would need to have the doors open or
Yes.
start the process?
I think.
That's when we would need the doors
Yeah, I
open.
think if you wait to start the process, another 3 years. So we just have to, and you can look at that as time goes on. If you've got the plan, you know what you're going to do at all the places, then that'll help, what decisions are made at the high school, and know what on the elementary schools. Because again, the part that Hal asked us to do, of course, I'm going to rely on him a lot to help do this. But to add, because let's say there's a, if I say this right, let's say we go for the next 5 years, and we don't have to do anything except wait because we can't get funding. We know that at every elementary school and every facility there's going to be maintenance and capital projects that are needed, and he's estimating some. So we're just going to, what I envision at each school, you might go along here and say, this year you need that amount of money for this year, this year, this year. But by 2000, let's say, I'll just use that hypothetical, 2030, we've got to have this new intermediate school. You can back up 3 years from that and say, okay, this one needs to start getting signed. Don't you think that would help you?
Yeah.
We think that's what you need to go to the city council and say, here's our plan. Our plan is K4, 5, 6, 6, 7. I'm sorry, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12. But we know here's when we're going to need money every year. And then this is where we're going to need the big expenditure. And then we've not plugged in the high school. That's kind of what I'm going to suggest in a few minutes. We think there needs to be some more planning on the high school, because that's another. We learned a lot of stuff in our meetings with the high school the other day, and so we'll share that with you.
It's going to be imperative that we start looking for land.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
Whether we can do anything, well, 10 years of my experience on it, from the time we start making the problem for the anticipate the problem,
No.
it takes that long to get that school opened. And so if we wait 10 years, we won't find any land in the city. So I think that we can do that if nothing else.
Yeah, that would be a good strategy to do that.
In 10 years, what land will cost?
We can
Yeah.
find it in the
If you
city.
find it, yeah.
So that's a discussion we can have if we decide on that plan.
Okay. Let's go to the next slide.
Yeah. This is something that Brian had to do this. He kind of did all this, but
That's how we started by looking at each block for the high school. You can just flip through those if you don't mind. There's like 4 of them. Each block, we looked at those and said, this is what happens in those areas. What we got got from that is encouraging when we met with the high school folks, realized that every teacher has a planning period. There's a lot of classrooms there that have nobody in them. And could we find a way to have more teachers, teacher planning area or something so that those classrooms could be used? There's a lot of classrooms unused at the time. All that comment was about efficiency. And of course, somebody's going to say, well, why do you add on a lot of stuff? If you've got classrooms you're sitting in, somebody walked up there and they looked at those slide areas, that means there's nobody in those classrooms at that block. And of course, I've always admired the high school scheduler. I don't know how they do it, but that gives you a little bit of vision of where we started trying to understand what's going on in the high school. Let's go now. So based on our last at the high school, based on what we came away with, is we looked at, I think there's like 11 math classrooms now. We think now we encouraged everybody look at the future. What programs do you not have that you want to have in each of these areas? And what should we, if we're going to look to the future, how many classrooms you have? So that gives you just a diagram of a little bit if you got, and what that capacity is, because we're trying to figure out too, what is the capacity of the high school? Could we do what I just suggested? Does everybody need that classroom all the time? And so we just kind of challenge the teachers to think about that. So, but we believe that you need 14 in math, 14 in English, language arts, 12 and 12 for social studies and science. That's kind of what we came away with. So what that means, I don't know yet. I said, I think one of the things that Brian and I talked about as we move ahead, trying to look at all these things I'm going to show you to refine those and get in more detail so we can actually come back and say, here's what we think needs to be done at high school based on some of the issues we know are happening there. Let's go on. So this, I hope, will be able to be used because some of these are still a little bit off, but I was amazed at that's what the ESL, that's what it looks like in a diagram in relationships. From a central area there, when you come into administration, some of the issues they talked about, we need somebody that's bilingual, we need an interpreter, we need somebody to escort these people, they need a gathering space. Then we've got these ESL folks in those classrooms, but we've got to have all these other things that relate to that, a social worker. So we try to identify all those, and then what we'll do is kind of test the relationship because it's important we know where some of the things are. And the thing, I'll let Brian comment most of it, the thing I felt was quite interesting, the heart of the school is where they want most of these things to happen. Counseling, ESL, bookstore, all these things is what they want to have in the beginning. And when students come into the school, they're not lost, especially those that are coming in and don't speak the language. They don't know where to go, what to do. So that's some of the quests with these functions. Right now, they won't fit in that center area we got right now. Let's go on to the next one. Special ed, the same thing. You've got CDC, that's pretty stationary. Then you've got the kind of the orange area, the ERC component. And I went ahead and stuck this in there. I know Dr. Elliott and I talked about it. Brian, that's one of the things I wasn't sure about until I read your notes, but I didn't know they mentioned having intervention rooms in each of the grade wings, and 9, 12, and I wasn't sure if that's one or two, or if you have two for each of those. So those are, I just kind of say there's still some discrepancies, or I shouldn't say discrepancies, things we still don't quite understand, how, whether it's decentralized or centralized, and what those areas are. Let's go next. Counseling, the same thing. Counseling offices, that's where they have a social worker. Actually got a food pantry, some things we've added into the spaces that we need to have. Next one. This is a big component. I know they're dreaming here probably, but right now, the programs they want to have in fine arts cannot be done in the existing facility. And there was a real effort to suggest to have a theater that could be 700 and 750 people, have a stage, orchestra pit, that we could actually do that or not do that, because we talked about how you could do that technology-wise. But again, if you have a really good place to have drama performance, then you've got to have a place to come in, an entrance to get into without being in the school necessarily, public toilets there. So it takes square footage to do that. Let's go with it. But again, band and choral would like to be close to that area because they see a strong relationship with that, using that space. So, and we've tried to put the square footage up there, and Brian and I need to get together and match these up so we have things on notes and we have things in this diagram I may have not quite understood. But choral has its, from different areas, a different size of classroom, the ensembles area, uniform storage, a lot of different things. Okay. And same thing, it's going back. Okay, so what are our next steps? So, I think what I'd like to do is that the last slide? There's one there that I didn't get put in because it was too big. But we had worked on a space summary for the high school. When we met with them, we had a bunch of things we plugged in, put on cards, where we said, if we have X number of students, this is how many teaching stations. And I've got something here that right now where we are is we're probably going to have probably 56 teaching stations in this. I think let me take that back. Previous capacity. That's not what I wanted to use. Yeah, there it is. It looked to me like we had about 50,000 square feet in CT. That sounds about right. Yeah, about 50,000 square feet. You can't plug that into that building. The CT got's all over the building. And so what we tried to identify in all those spaces, and there's like 16 or 17, plus about 5 future CTs have been requested. So obviously, you as the board will have to help us make the decision what really gets put in, what can add on in the future, how we do that. But just thinking about that, everybody wants the CTE portion, and again, Brian can jump in there. But we want that to be a bit readily visible. Everybody else is doing that now wants the CTE to be a focal point of the school. And if people can see that, that's a real mover and shaker right now. And so the issue is how do we do that? How do we present that to you in a way that we know there's a certain square footage? We know the fine arts is going to be a pretty good chunk of space, and we're adding on a whole new auditorium. How do we put that on the site? We've got some issues, so maybe that's a good time for me to turn that over to you in this.
Okay. Yeah, that was the initial goal with the high school, was to bring back a comprehensive plan, because we over the years made some moves really out of necessity, replacing the arena, the science wing, but knowing that there are future needs, particularly in the west wing, looking at big picture to see, how we make the most with those moves, like what goes in that. If it gets to the point where the part of the west wing is demolished, what piece of program makes the most sense to go in those areas, knowing also realistically, as Don said, there's a pretty big piece of CTE already in the west wing. So just from a scheme and scheduling standpoint, you really have to relocate that at some point to be able to do something and demolish part of the west wing, because those types of spaces can't be replicated in a portable classroom for a period of time. So it's just, that's where we are right now. We have had some very good programming meetings where we've gotten input from faculty and administrators, and we're digesting all that information. And I think what our process would be to come back with some concepts as to, here's something that could be possible. You could add to the CTE wing and it could look like this. And, if this was where we adapted the west wing, that might make sense to incorporate the auditorium space near the band. So those types of concepts to be able to, get a comprehensive plan so that as you make decisions choice, you're making, and with that is a guiding piece. That's our goal, or that's really where we are as far as the next few steps. I think Don and I feel pretty good about where, what we've accomplished and what we've identified at the K-5 and the middle school. The high school is a little more complicated because it has transformed over the years, and, we've learned a lot about it. I think Al learned a little bit about it, about how things are going on there. So the three of us are working together to develop some concepts to get back in front of Dr. Elliott and Dr. Dyer to see what makes sense as we move
Because
forward.
people don't have the space they need, they're just improvising. That's a good word, they're just improvising the best they can.
And you have, the site is limited, so we've often said, this is your opportunity, right? To not only look at growth, which we're saying that there's going to be future growth at the high school, but also looking at how you can enhance programs within the building. And the other projects that we've done have been able to capitalize on that. Now it's kind of looking at it collectively.
But I think the next steps for us would like a blessing to maybe revisit to make sure we understand all the CE components, what's needed there. As Brian said, develop some conceptual ideas, and they are conceptual, big view kind of things, because it relates to what with Hal's input about he knows there's things that need to be done to the building now, whether it be HVAC, plumbing. So what we've got to figure out is how do we fit this into that schedule, if that's the right word, of what's going to happen in the next 10, 15 years. We've got dates for some of the things, milestones. Maybe, as we've discussed, maybe there's a way of phasing some of the things at the high school to try to make things better in a shorter amount of time. So that's kind of where we are. We think if we can move forward a little bit, that maybe we could try to take another couple of months to refine those, and then maybe finalize reports. So maybe by the end of July, somewhere in that time frame, we could wrap this up into a document for you that you can kind of present that to the city council. So this is our study. This is what we think should happen in the future, and give us the best idea we can what that might happen cost-wise.
We know that plumbing at the West Wing is maybe good for 10 years if we're lucky under those classrooms. So could we develop a plan that we could phase in that change and the timeline for that? Design what we want that to be, how much of that West Wing needs to go for all of it, and if we have to rebuild there, what does that look like to best utilize the need?
I think that's exactly what we're thinking.
So you have a visual.
Within 10 years, because we know we'll be lucky if we get 10 years out of that.
Yeah.
But we know that's a problem. We can't turn our heads and say, oh, we'll worry about that 10 years from now. We need to do it.
I may interrupt you for that. And that's exactly what we've talked about. So if we're going to do in 10 years, we have CT in the West Wing. So we may need to start moving that if the design were to call and move it to the East Wing. And that's not been determined. But if it were to call for that, then you would start over the next 10 years phasing that in, so that with the master plan comes, if we do have to move it forward, we'll do the teachable subjects and the affordable, so we don't lose our CTE programs for 2 or 3 years while we're building them. So we can still keep those. So we moved them, we phased it, and we moved them ahead of time and got them into a permanent location possibly, so that they're not affected by construction. So that's the type of thing that they're looking at doing, the fly out plan that would fit to give us a long-term solution. Start working on now.
I think we have to do that now.
Could be, we've talked, it could be, if relocating the CTE that's in the West Wing is very important to do ahead of anything that you're doing in the West Wing. Maybe you incorporate part of that project to the 5-6. So it's in that 5-6 year window of time, and you go ahead and make that move as part of that project. That frees up the West Wing for being able to follow up as a future project. And that's done.
Al, how many classrooms for CT are back there by Renee's office compared to the West Wing? that a normal question or not?
I believe there's three classrooms.
You go to that, there's one of those slides.
Seven, well, there's three on that end.
High school.
By Rennie's office.
And they're back by Reed's office.
By Rennie's office.
How many's on the far west side?
Two at there.
Okay, the purple, that's CTE.
Purple.
So, and then you got cosmetology lab, then you got automotive and, STEM lab,
Yeah.
not like STEM lab, like, automotive, robotics.
Well, culinary arts takes up three of those rooms.
You know, it just seems like we're looking at new entrants going in by, you know, Rennie's office and maybe some of those classrooms, could they, seem like, to me, like we either put, enlarge where CT is around Rennie's office. You know, instead of trying to move, because you got labs back there and you got, what do you got, Bob? The automobile thing back there, and you got a lot of bigger things back there, and over in the west wing is more what? Engineering, and
Well,
medical.
and the part of this is when you're talking about the theater and getting the band and the chorus and the theater somewhat together. Or more than that's again, a design feature that they have to look at. So do you do that during, you look at the demolition of the west wing and looking at part of that area being your, I'm not saying you do, I'm just saying as a question that these gentlemen would have to figure out, is that what you do there? Do you look at putting a new theater in where you can get your whole school into a theater and put on, the performances?
So that's the next step. We'd like to be able to make sure that we're clear on the program, but come up with some conceptual diagrams that would say, okay, here's what it would look like if we expanded the CTE wing over on the east side to incorporate what's on the west side, and to be able to provide opportunities for future programs. And then going back to look at the west side, okay, what does it look like if we look to the fine arts space needs, and then also growth for typical classroom space. So we've got a pretty good feel for how many classrooms we need, and then we can project growth.
We've got signs pretty well.
Yeah.
That's not gonna change.
No, but just thinking down the road, I mean, even where the current library is, that could turn into a CTE space, and then in the new building, you can build up the library. Because then you have a center space that's kind of built out for, CTE. So there are different things we can do.
So that
With the
courtyard behind the science wing.
So I'm just kind of saying there's a lot of different ideas that have to be fleshed
And
out.
we've heard some really good
Yeah.
comments about
Yeah.
organization, and things that, hey, if it was reorganized a little bit like this, it would really function better. So
I think that's why I was trying to do some of the diagrams, because when we start looking at that, and we can confirm those, then like you said, we're gonna have all kinds of options.
Right.
That's kind of programming design, because it's hard to put that down in writing. This is our exact program, what we do is this is our program needs. In this case, how do we implement that we're not starting with a clean slate. We gotta manipulate that program for someone goes in existing place, something we did, so that determines what the addition is, and then where's fine art go, and how big is that gonna be?
Yeah, I mean, it's fun to dream, because you can think about like the West Wing, if that went away and you built a science building type format, you go up and set it out, maybe that makes more room for a new something, to go there. Just fun to think
And
about.
don't mention that courtyard, there, that's
The space.
just a space we could use for something.
It just seems like the CTE that's in the east wing of these are leave there, because you got the automobiles and robotics and all that stuff. I mean, it seems like these are moved the west wing to the east side as far as CTE. What do you think, Principal DeVee?
Other than culinary would be the hardest.
Yeah, with
Probably of all of that, wouldn't you think? I think so.
everybody else will be easier.
Everybody else. I think so.
Yeah, actually though, with culinary even to be consideration, a lot of times we're running them from the end of the village all the way to the commons and all the way down to the leadership classes. Right. And it would make sense to have your culinary actually.
Yeah.
So,
And that's what I think is so beneficial to have, Brian and Dawn being looking at these from the outside, somebody that isn't kind of ingrained with that's how it's always been done, or that's how it functions now, or that's how we've made it work, that we can open up these different ideas like moving the library and building up
and really kind of look at it as a blank slate and seeing how can we use this outline for the most convenient instead of having to look at these pods or configurations.
Could the library be used for that culinary? Where it is now, because that's not decided. So that's a-
I mean, I mean, anything for the temp work, whatever we do, but yeah, we can, I mean, that's a possibility. That's me just talking right here without looking at where all the electric is, but yeah, I mean, it would be something. We have a main power bank up there, actually, by the CTE, actually real close to where you're talking about. We have a very large transformer and a switch here, so those are the things. I'm not a designer, but I think those are things for those guys, but I think about our infrastructure, and we do have the infrastructure.
I think that's convenience for the culinary staff.
I mean, we are limited on our space at the high school.
Yeah.
You know, we don't have a lot of extra space just lying around up there. But when I think about, you know, for example, Carterville High School, the building that was I think it was $105 million for the new school. Bartlett High School renovated their older high school and made it look 50 and new, kind of like what we're talking about. That project they took on was around $80 million. I don't know what it would look like for here for us, but you know, there's talking about two projects that I know pretty well. And you know, Bartlett is more similar to what we're looking at here. I think use the current building, but redesigned its total package and usage. And it's a beautiful site.
It has to be done. We don't.
And it was done with students still using the building.
Okay.
And
What a
we're gonna know more
challenge.
about bank
You guys are gonna be You're gonna resign that year, right?
Okay.
But I mean, I think that's immediate. I really think, you know, 10 years is what it takes us. We got to plan it. We got to figure out, you know, how the high school can, what it can look like. And then when we agree on what that can look like, then the high school's got to figure out how to implement that in their program every single day. And we've got to be funding. And it's going to take us every minute of every day to get that done. So we need to start that plan, I think, sooner than 5, 6. Although I still think we need to look at that.
There has been some comments from city council members about the size of the high school. I mean, the middle school, having, yes, they're welcome to mention it to me. Because I know they're getting calls like, we are.
Too big, too small?
Oh, it's too big. I mean, it's too small for the amount of students.
Oh, yeah, for the most students.
So can I just interject too? I know that this facility wasn't part of this component of the planning, but is that, what is the status of that?
Right now, we are somewhat on hold until we kind of know what city council and mayor are doing with the final negotiations for that regular drive building.
So we're not pursuing any conceptual stuff with this.
Right now, I'll let Al speak to that, but right now, we've
We've done an
pretty much put that on
evaluation.
hold and without the evaluation, yes.
Yeah, we've done an evaluation of the building, but right now we're holding off until we find, because that's really, in order for y'all to move any direction with this building, we gotta know what we're doing with it. But there has been an evaluation of the building done, but we're just kind of waiting to bring anything to the building, know which way are the possibilities.
Well, you're pleased with the shape of the building? and how it's done?
I think what we've seen so far, and Brian, please, we were surprised that the roof girders were in better shape than we thought when the civil or structural engineer came in and looked. The building is in better shape as far as that piece of it. Now, utilizing it for something is going to take considerable funding, you know, because anytime you break into walls, redo plumbing, that's going to be expensive. But if the building was in better shape, and we do have to go ahead, as y'all voted to put the roof on, that we've got to get the roof on so that we don't have further damage to the girders and end up having to replace girders. That's the last thing.
Kristen, you and Dave have not been in it. Hal took myself and Cliff in it. Of course, Peggy and Don have already been in it.
Are
It
you
has a lot
talking
of,
about the greater,
Greater
okay, yeah, I'm talking about this building.
okay.
So-
That's got a lot of possibilities.
So
already,
this
right?
building, though, and its footprint, the land attached, wouldn't be an option in terms of like an intermediary school or something like that, is what I'm asking. Is it something that we need to be thinking as an option to fulfill one of those needs.
It's too small to have, how many acres are in it?
I would have to look in the capital plan. I have it in there. I unfortunately don't remember.
Nowhere near
I
25.
don't think we're near 25, and I think you would have to start looking at incorporating Arnold with this building, street closures, and then you'd have to start looking at what that would look like. And I don't know.
But we can look at that and see.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm
we
just
can
curious,
take a
because
look.
I think we still need to be looking at land, because even if we were able to use this. we
I don't think
need
it would give you enough
elementary.
land, and I think you also, between the historical district, right there at Arnold, and I think you're also talking about transportation. They're trying to bring 1,200 kids in. This would be tough on these streets to do transportation wise. Lots of, yeah, that range. Difficult to do with this particular location. But, I mean, I'm not saying it's impossible. I do think we need to look at it like that.
Anybody else? Don or Brian on this part of it?
Well, I'd like to say, I'm sorry you didn't have a better representation. Something I looked at now, I wish I'd maybe copied some things for you. It's hard to see on that. When I was trying to put that in PowerPoint, one of my associate designers said, boring, boring, boring.
There's a lot of numbers up there, Don.
But I guess I felt like you all had a lot of numbers the first time. And that this is regurgitate all this. I really wanted to see that we've been working and we're trying to provide the background stuff that will allow you to have the information that you can make informed decisions. I wanted to kind of show you how we were building that, and I think the essence is we think the plan is what it should be, pay for 5, 6, so on. So we just want you to know we think we're getting the background to allow that to happen. The high school is still a big picture that's going to be a major effort. We can move on that one, and hopefully we can come back to you in the near future and say, here's the timeline and phasing that I think would be appropriate. So thank you for bearing with the hard numbers and just listening to me going on. So
Can you make us a copy?
I have copies ready after, and you'll get electronic as well.
yeah, I've got the PowerPoint.
Anybody else? You're welcome to stay. We can leave if you want to. Well, Hal Taylor's going to talk to us about the middle school HVAC system.
That's so exciting.
Really exciting, isn't it? Congratulations.
To reiterate your comment, boring, boring.
Oh, wow, you know, Dr. Dyer sees me coming, and he knows it's very seldom good news.
Yeah, I just want.
He just, yeah, so it's hard to catch up on that. So, let me just kind of fill you in what we had going on in the middle school. We had a line break. It's out in the geothermal field. It's not deep, and we'll be able to fix that, but we didn't know it was broken initially. And when you're pumping water out, then that means there's a void and water has to come back in. Unfortunately, water came back in that had a lot of mud in it. And that water muddy water has been pumped through the building loop throughout the middle school. And now, due to some things that, just due to the way that the system is and so forth, it's nobody's fault, but the mud has settled down into the HVAC units, and we're getting units that are getting clogged up. And so we've come up with a plan to fix this situation. It's not a short-term plan. There's really nobody we can call, just being quite honest about it, because it's not like everybody works on these type of systems, and we know it better than anybody. So where there's not really a contractor we can call and say, we need you to come fix this. This is something that's going to have to be done by the maintenance department. Because frankly, nobody knows it better than Scotty and Philip and my partner. So we're going to have to install about 140 2-inch valves into every HVAC system in that building. And then we're going to have to flush the system, get this mud out. And it's actually going to go on for a while that we have to clear these units out. But the first thing is for us, one, to get all the parts in, all the stuff we need, and then to have a time set aside, we can do this with the children in the building. And that makes Good Friday the very soonest that we can look at that. So on Good Friday, we will be working if Saturday as well, if necessary. And then Monday's a teacher conference day. we're gonna be taking advantage of those 3 days. We're gonna be doing a bunch of work at the middle school to get that system flushed and get it back up and going and get the units back in shape. It's just gonna be a tremendous amount of work in a very short period of time. There is a cost. I've talked to Cindy about it, and she's worked out the funding piece. It'll be coming out of, she's working out whether it's out of the maintenance budget or out of another fund there. She's still handling that. I'll let her address that later, but I did think that y'all need to be updated, let you know what's going on. We have about 6 rooms over there right now that we have the cooling down. We're trying to get those up and going, and we're just asking everybody to be patient with us. It may be a little uncomfortable. We're doing everything we can, but it's just, unfortunately, that's just one of those situations that happens.
How did you discover how did you discover the line was broken? Is it when you saw the mud or?
Well, what we found is there was a wet spot. We had, and part of the problem was all that rain we had, we had it. So we just contributed initially, everybody contributed that much rain. But then when everything else started drying up, we still had a very large amount of water coming down and feeding onto the track. And so then once that dried up, and then we got to researching, we got a call. Cleveland Utilities is great. If they have a water alarm going off, even though we have to pay for it, if they see that they call us and they let us know we got issues. And so again, we get those calls, and then we start hunting for the problem, just like we did with the water at the high school. And so we found the problem. Scott Carroll was notifying us that he had some orders to do, so I want to give him credit because he helped out with it. And so yeah, that's how we identified the problem. And initially we thought it was just we isolated it, we shut the water off. Initially we didn't realize that it got into the building, and that we had mud in the lines. But what happened is it actually started clogging up, and it's the design of the piping. Like I said, it's nobody's fault because you can't foresee something like that. But it just happens to be the design of the piping, the way it comes down, it just kind of catches the mud in the bottom. And without going into the whole thing on piping, I don't want to worry about that. But it's just, like I said, one of those things that's happened. And we're going to have to take care of it.
Can you do it in those 2 days? You said Good Friday and.
We won't get it completely fixed. We will get it where we can service it. And that's the key, is being able to cut those lines off. Right now it's set up where we have to cut off the whole grade level at a time. Well, we can't do that with children in the building. So this will at least let us shut off a classroom at a time, or 2 classrooms at a time, and fix them so that we can still stay in class and keep the school going. And we can get to the bottom of it and take care of it.
So no holiday for you all.
Well, not this year, it won't be, but
We'll make it up with that team.
Yeah, we'll make it up. And I tell you, the maintenance guys know that's part of the job. It's part of it, and they know that that's part of the job description. That's a very clear part of it, and everybody knows that when it comes time to get to it, that's part of
Now, 2 things. Are we gonna have the valves, have them here?
I've been told that yes, he's gonna get them here for me. And the supplier that's getting them, he's already ordered. He said he's gonna be able to get them off for us.
And the geothermal, are you going to repair the geothermal in the ground?
We can repair that. That's actually accessible where it broke. We know where it broke.
Okay.
We'll be able to, but that'll be a summertime repair because it will.
Football
It'll take some
field?
digging. No, it's not on the football field. It's up actually at the vault, where the vault is. So it is a repairable area, but it'll wait till summertime because it will require some backhoe and some digging.
Not like you did in the West Wing last year, 5 holes inside the building.
Yeah, well, it won't be that intensive, so
Whoa.
but that's just where we are with it. And it's like I said, mainly want to inform you of it, let you know what was going on, and what the plan of action is.
Any other comments, anybody? Want to welcome the new principal to be, Mr. Pritchard, here. Be taking over July 1st. And Julie, Monday night, 5:30, board meeting. Any other comments or anything? We're adjourned.
If I survive. Charlie, if I survive July 1st,
If you survive who?
till July 1st.
Oh. Gotta get to July 1 first.
Yes, sir. I appreciate it.
Good to see you.